And we're live. What's up, you guys? Welcome to Psychedelic New Year's special with the Bitcoin Path.
What's up? Good to be
How's it
here.
going, guys?
Howdy ho, nice to be here.
So we've got Brandon Quittem, John Vallis, and Erik Cason. Sorry, I had another window with the live stream actually going. That was confusing. Cool. So yeah, I guess my purpose, we just start off like my purpose in getting you guys together for this little chat. When I came to really start to understand Bitcoin, it was in a time in my life where, well, I guess in a lot of our lives at the same time, earlier this year in 2020, where just so much was going on in the world that it felt as though the world was changing so fast around me, and it really it reminded me of certain times where I had been on acid and been going walking through basically a normal city, but seeing a very different city than what I was normally seeing, and it was just a very fascinating journey of going through that, and then coming around Bitcoin somehow brought that into more of a positive light for me, and it sort of brought me into this whole other trajectory. So like, that's a broad sweeping introduction, but that's kind of like where my inspiration came from for bringing this topic up. And so I'd love to, I guess, open up a question for you guys. Like, maybe each of you could talk a little bit about like how maybe how your approach to Bitcoin has, or how your approach to life in general has been affected by your exploration of psychedelics, and you're able to go into however much detail you want. I know we're kind of in a public forum, so it can be a little weird.
All right, I can jump in first here. So first off, welcome, or I guess thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. It seems like there's a lot of overlap with Bitcoiners and psychedelia, so I love that this thread keeps on getting pulled, and I'm happy to participate. And so in my personal life, I started experimenting with psychedelics right after college, so age like 22, cannabis a few years before that. And I kind of went through like a 5-year tear, let's say 22 to 27, where I was like, holy shit, there's something here. I need to get to the bottom of this. So kind of did a wide range of different experiences in that time. And then since maybe like late 20s, early 30s, I sort of slowed down, was a little bit more intentional with it. Less frequency, a little bit deeper experiences, and more meaningful. And I would say probably like 80% of my eureka moments came in those first 5 years. But now I see it more as like an ally for my life moving forward. And some things that come to mind, we can go into details maybe later, but I feel more empathetic generally as a person. That was a massive one, mostly coming from MDMA. And I grew up in a household with a strong father and strong expectations, get good grades, work hard, that kind of a mentality, and strong personal responsibility as well. And so I put that on myself more or less my whole life. And the first few times with MDMA, which is more of a heart opener, if that's a new term for you, I felt this immense love or empathy for other people, and that, which is nice in and of itself. But even more importantly, I felt that for myself. And it sort of felt like a backpack was, taken off my back. And I could then give a little bit more compassion to myself. It's okay. You might have destructive habits. That's part of you. You do have a dark side. That's okay. Make friends, integrate with those things. Other things like stereotypical stuff like more open-minded, more creative. I think I fell in love with learning also, where school was more like a game. You just beat the teacher, beat the test with as little amount of work as possible. And then in those first few psychedelic experiences, I was like, whoa, the world is wonderful. I can open my eyes and stare at a tree for 3 hours and realize that there's a lot going on there that I might have taken for granted. And so I think it opened me up in all kinds of different ways. Also take myself less serious, which I can probably use that lesson. I can probably relearn that lesson every week or two, even now. And then the last one I'll touch on before passing it off is I grew up in a Christian household. So I'm going to church on Sundays and memorizing all the things and saying the whatevers. And I wouldn't say I was any sort of like hardcore person, but I was in it. And then once I left my parents' home at age 18, went to school, I became a staunch atheist. Like religions are the devil. You shouldn't do this. These are parasites. Horrible, horrible, horrible. And then, integrate some psychedelics into my life. And I realized, okay, maybe there's more to life than I understand. And my rigid intellectual mind is not sufficient to grasp the mysteries. And so I would say I'm a little bit more open to these new ideas. And I actually can see how religions, although they have a lot of baggage, they actually do provide some sort of a guide rail for society. Again, with all the baggage they come with, there are some purposes there. It provides a lot of structure and value for people. And so now I would consider myself open to those things, but yeah, it's kind of an interesting journey.
That's fascinating. Thanks, Brandon. I definitely identify a lot with you in that area. I come from a very religious background as well, having grown up in a Christian home, but then taking it a lot more seriously in my junior year of high school. I had this very powerful spiritual experience in a worship setting. And that really, it solidified a really strong belief in God that then like blasted open my curiosity of like wanting to go deeper and deeper into understanding what is actually going on here, because it was an experience that was so outside of my normal realm of day-to-day life, and yeah, so I think it's fascinating how we can sort of fluctuate from these different beliefs, and just fascinating how where we kind of land. Thanks for sharing that, man.
John, would you like to go?
Yeah, you fire away.
All right, cool. Let's see my experience. I was pretty opposed to drugs until I was like 25 or so. And that's actually when I met my wife, and she got me into using cannabis, which I started doing more frequently after that. And I've continued kind of along that path. But then also near the same time, when I was about 22 or 23, and I had this really cool roommate that she's actually a biochemist. And so pretty much she was like, hey, have you ever tried MDMA? I was like, no, I stay away from drugs because they're bad and dangerous. And she was like, no, like, let me like educate you here. So she gave me Molly. I had a really wonderful heart opening experience. And that was kind of the progress. And then, I'd messed around a bit with shrooms. I'd actually taken an excessive amount at one point in time, not really understanding it. And I had this really profound, like near-death experience in psychedelic, which scared me off till I was about 30. And then I was struggling a lot with alcoholism. And I kept finding that as much as I wanted to stop, I kept going back to drinking really heavily. And at this point, I started doing more research, and I found out that Bill W., one of the founders of AA, he had a pretty profound experience with LSD and helping him quit. So I was really at a point where I was pretty frustrated. So I decided to go down that rabbit hole, and acquired myself some LSD. And I remember in that first trip, I had this really profound experience where I realized like how much kind of beauty and hidden wonders that the world had. And it's hard to put in words, but I just finally found the willpower to really like relinquish it. And I think maybe it was more of like a surrendering to a higher power that I got to experience through LSD. Yeah, and then kind of moving forward from that, you know, I got interested in the whole psychedelic community and started experimenting with a whole array of different psychedelics. But I usually keep it in a pretty tight container of regarding it as I don't want to necessarily say a religious experience, but I really use it to like further my own understanding of myself, and I try to like hold it in a sacred capacity. And it's been a really wonderful thing that's helped me relax more into myself, have more esteem in my life choices, and really like just kind of have communion with my own spiritual process. And it's been really profound because without that, you know, I really don't know where I would be, because I'd still probably be an alcoholic. And, you know, I was definitely on a wrecking course to really destroying myself. So I'm really happy that I found that and that I allowed for it to change me.
Respect.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah,
And
man.
not uncommon for people who are hearing this, you know, for the first time, this type of rhetoric. It's a common story that I've heard quite a bit over my years. Yeah, John, unless you want to jump in, shall I go? I think you're muted, John.
Oh no.
Oh, there you go.
Go right ahead, John. You're good.
First, I just need to preface this conversation by saying a lot of the words that you attempt. Well, first of all, these experiences are completely ineffable. So we're really, really, really handicapped with words when we try to even touch these sort of experiences. And I almost hate myself for trying, because I know I'm doing it such a disservice when I try. And sometimes I feel just like you shouldn't, it's the thing that you shouldn't be spoken of. You shouldn't talk about it at all. You should only live it. You should only be an expression of whatever you've gained from those experiences, and you shouldn't talk about it at all. And to be frank, I haven't decided whether or not that's the right course of action or not. I may end up coming to that conclusion someday soon, because I'm feeling more and more that may be the case. But we'll give it a crack on this discussion tonight. But yeah, and also for people that are not, experienced with these, initiated in these experiences, let's say, a lot of this language is going to seem cliche and hyperbolic and unbelievable and that kind of stuff. And that's just the nature of the beast, because, those are the only words we have. And all I can say is, you try to use the words that are available to articulate something that is literally unbelievable unless you've experienced it. And, that's just the way it is. So as far as origin story, for me, I've always been just crazy curious. And I guess I had some early influences of like some weirdos in my life that I found exceptionally interesting, like a media tycoon in my city comes to mind. And my dad worked for him, and he was kind of a magnate in Canada, or Eastern Canada, in the 70s and 80s. And he was there with John and Yoko during the bed-in in Montreal, and he's got a really cool life story. He was with John Lilly for his experiments with ketamine and sensory deprivation, and he's just a far out dude. And I got to sit at his feet. Literally, he'd come over for dinner, and I'd sit in front of his chair, and he'd be like telling me about UFOs and misshaped skulls in Peru and the pyramids and all the rest of it, and I'd just be like, "Fucking what?" And I loved it. I ate it up. And as I grew up, I started smoking marijuana when I was 13, I think. And I thought it was awesome, and I always respected it. And I always was forthcoming about it, like with my parents and peers and stuff, because I was like, look, I get good grades, I take care of my body, I'm active, I'm sportive, like everything is in order. But when it's time for me to relax or hang out with my girlfriend or eat some delicious food, I want to amplify that shit with this amazing plant. And I'm going to do that. So that's kind of how I got down. And, you know, I thought marijuana was this like miraculous sort of substance. I mean, this thing that makes food taste better, sex feel better, you know, elevated move, everything is funny. Like it, and it's just this thing that grows. And, you know, I thought it was amazing. But I did think that drugs were just like a variety of intoxicants, sort of, even though you know, marijuana, I almost felt, kind of always felt it had a spiritual element to it. But you know, psychedelics weren't on my radar until a mishap with a bunch of my guy friends, I think just after high school. And we were intending to have just a giggle fest because that's all we knew that magic mushrooms were good for. And it ended up being like a mistaken dose. And I had a extremely powerful and challenging experience. And subsequent to that, I just thought, you know, I need to learn as much as I can about this. So I got on Amazon and bought all the books. And I think a few months later, I was down in Peru, looking for a shaman to, you know, learn about ayahuasca with. And I ended up being down there in the jungle for a month, and then proceeded on to another couple months traveling around South America. And then the next year I did that again. And I spent more time in a village with a shaman and having these ayahuasca ceremonies. And, you know, and part of it was just like, when you have an experience that gives you a glimpse of that state of consciousness that's available through these substances, at least from my mind, it was impossible not to pursue that, because I didn't know that realm of consciousness existed. I didn't know that realm of, you know, power or energy, or however we want to characterize it, existed. And it was not in any sense an intoxicant of the kind that I was used to, because I drank alcohol in my youth too. And like, I'd get together with my buddies on the weekend and we'd go in someone's basement and drink a bunch of beer until we were fucking wasted and someone was puking, and we'd go home. And, you know, that was kind of adolescence. And I didn't know that a more powerful, a more truthful, a more pristine, experience of consciousness was available. So, you know, I was set on fire with that curiosity, and I kind of traveled the world looking for the different ways in which different cultures throughout history brought it about and facilitated these experiences. And since that time, it's been an integral aspect of my life. Like I don't smoke weed almost. I don't smoke weed anymore, probably like once a year or something like that. And I don't drink much alcohol. But once or twice a year, I try to have extremely intentional, you know, sacramental, ceremonial use of psychedelics in a natural setting, to do a couple things. One is to clean out the cobwebs of the previous 6 months or 12 months, you know, things that I've neglected or things that I've pushed down, or, you know, just kind of the accumulated nonsense over the past 12 months. I use it because it dramatically shifts your perspective, and you're able to see things from a different angle than you're used to, and you're forced to confront them as well. So they're helpful in a therapeutic sense, where you can see things differently, and that helps you orient how you might approach them differently. And I think that's beneficial. And so I use them for that purpose. But the other one is, and this is the part that's difficult to articulate, but if you believe that it's possible to have a divine communion with the majesty of, you know, the moment or reality or whatever all of this is, if you believe it's possible to unite with that in a total sense, you know, and again, that's just not doing it justice, but if you believe that you can access that state, then I think it's almost like you can't not revisit it, because it is a type of communion. And like I don't overdo it, obviously doing it once or twice a year, but I think to reconnect with whatever that state of consciousness or energy seems to be the right thing to do, you know, even if I don't come away with it with like specific actionable items of how I'm going to make my life better as a result, the act of doing it seems to be the right thing to do. And Yeah, I mean, we can dig into maybe some of the elements of what that experience entails, but that's kind of been my approach to it since I first. Well, that's how I came to be interested in it and how I came to approach it.
Thanks, John. I 100% agree, and I concur what you started off with saying, that like these are experiences, right? They are not necessarily. It's not like reading a book that you can kind of deduce the argument and see what the author's thesis is and what the argument is clearly trying to portray. And so you can analyze it in a very logical form. And they're also very intimate experiences, right? That we are, that at least as I reflect on my own experiences, that it's very unique. And even as I'm with a friend who's there with me, they are kind of experiencing they're having their own journey as well. And so I share your sentiment in have almost a cautious, having a cautious approach to this, because in one sense it's kind of easy to sound like a crazy person, just, which is kind of funny in relation to Bitcoin. Like, of course, we sound like crazy people sometimes when we talk about Bitcoin, but it is also a very special, intimate thing that we have as just people going through life. And I kind of, struggle with that, that balance between like, well, what do we share with others, and maybe help others to possibly experience similar things, and what do we keep private?
Yeah, if I can jut in with one, 2 points that maybe I missed out. One is I think it's important to note, and everyone has their own approach and process, and so it's by no means a one size fits all here. But my own experience has been that it's been a progression. So it's not like you can just shove 10 grams of mushrooms in your mouth and you're delivered to the Godhead or to Nirvana or however you want to characterize it. It requires quite a bit of internal work to kind of unlock those successive doors or levels and continue pushing further. I mean, I'm at the state now where I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And even the most recent one that I've done, it's been, I've made progress into further into the experience. And so it is a practice, just as other things are practices. Because I think sometimes people think like it's somewhat gratuitous, like, oh, you can just eat a bunch of mushrooms and you're delivered there. And also sometimes people think like, oh, it just doesn't work for them because I had a bad experience. And it's very much just a tool, and you can use a tool to build something, or the tool can hurt you just as easily, and there's a lot of involvement from your side to get the most out of it. And the other thing in terms of like what big takeaways there is, like I perhaps like many people, an even greater reverence for nature, and for the majesty of the natural world, and all that kind of stuff. But one is definitely a different relationship to my perception of death, because it kind of causes you to, from my experience, I'll use the term realize. I know that's making an assumption, but realize that, the awareness or the energy that ignites me, or that I look out at the world with, ultimately is the same as the one that you look out at the world with, and everyone else does as well. It's just in a different avatar. And as a result of being in a different avatar, the circumstances and environment and conditions around that avatar mean that avatar looks and acts somewhat differently. And I think recognizing that that's the case, that you're not your avatar, nor your constructed identity or any of the conditioning that you've developed throughout the course of your life, but you're actually something far more universal, and that you can actually gain access to that awareness. And you can actually, despite being in that avatar, look out at the world and experience the world as the universal awareness for a period of time. And then remember that when you come back down, not that we walk around like feeling like we're everyone when we're not, in these, having these ceremonial experiences, but you remember that insight that despite your associations with the different identifications of your ego or who you believe you are, you realize, perhaps for the first time, that there's actually something more fundamental behind all that. And I think that allows a certain, well, one, it changes your perspective on death, because and ancient cultures used to refer to this process as dying before you die. You get to experience what it feels like for who you are, all the things you think you are, John, white, 6 feet, like all this other stuff, be, kind of disintegrate and melt away, and see what remains after that process happens. And who knows, like maybe when we die, it is just eternal blackness, but it gives you a sense that, that you get to experience the death of your ego, but not the death of your awareness. And so what's left over as awareness afterwards seems like a universal thing. And then it comes back down into the avatar. And I think you engage with your ego self differently after that. You probably take it a little less seriously. You're able to manipulate it, have a little bit more fun with it. You don't have such a rigid perception of who you are, what you are, and that kind of stuff. And so, those two things I think are fundamental and important considerations and aspects of this pursuit. And I just wanted to make a note of them.
Great points, John. One thing that you just mentioned, you are not your mind. That's what came to mind for me, where, you sort of strip away all the things that you think you are, and yet you're still there observing things in a more real sense. And just having a taste, just a glimpse of hyperspace, or whatever you want to call it, changes everything. And you can come back down and say, okay, I saw a peek around the curtain. Life is more interesting than I gave it credit for ahead of time. And to me, that's an extremely optimistic thing to experience. Again, changing the perspective on death. And Alan Watts has a quote, which I strongly disagree with, which is, when you get the message, hang up the phone.
Thought about that quote last night. Totally disagree as well.
Absolutely hate when I hear that. It's like, I had a psychedelic experience when I was 25. I learned all the secrets of the universe and nothing else matters from here on out because I know it all now. What kind of nonsense is that? However, he also has another perspective where he's saying essentially that you get to the end of your life and you realize that the purpose of life was not achievement and accumulating things and whatever. The purpose of life, or life, was a song or a dance. The purpose was to sing and play and dance all along. And I think that ties in nicely with you get a little glimpse of hyperspace, take yourself less seriously, and realize that you're kind of in control of your own reality, your own perspective, your own reaction to things. So you might as well have a good time while you're here. And I think that the playful side of me can get lost in the achiever side of me. And that makes me sort of less fun to be around. And that's not good for my wife or friends or whatever. And so I need to always remember that side. And for me, it's like, if I'm not working out hard, like sprints, heavy weights, whatever it is, playing sports of some kind, then I feel like I'm a bit more irritable. And so, it's sort of just being more conscious of who I want to show up as for those around me. And I think these periodic reminders, dipping into the well, really help that. Like, I consider it like a defrag of my mind, and just sort of cleaning out the cobwebs, like you mentioned, all the stuff that I feel like I don't have time to deal with, or I just repress because it's a hard thing to think about, or it's an emotional thing. Just stuff those in the corner. And then when I develop the courage enough to just take the lessons, then I'll deal with those things. And to wrap this one up, tying it back into John Lilly, who he was very into psychedelics. He thought this was really important. They became illegal and he wanted to continue pursuing them. So he invented the float tank, which was an attempt to change his consciousness through floating in salt water and in isolation. So your senses are sort of turned off. It opens, your mind's essentially free, or it has more bandwidth because it's not taking in all this sensory input. And if you haven't done this, I highly, highly recommend it. But one really powerful experience for me was in Bali, 2018. I made friends with one of the guys there who had a retreat center and a bunch of float tanks. And I was like, have you ever tried eating mushrooms in the float tank? And he goes, yes. And I was like, can I do that? And he said, yes. Okay. He said, the shop closes at 8 o'clock. Come anytime after 8. Door number 3 is yours. Just be out of there before 7 a.m. the next morning so we can clean the tank before our new customers come. Okay. So I take my little motorbike up in the hills, go to the retreat center with 45 grams of psilocybe azurescens, wet. So divide that by 10, call it 4.5 grams, still a large dose. I took that in 3 different things, went in the float tank all night, and had one of the best nights of my whole life. And surprisingly, a mild psychedelic experience, but it was exactly what I needed. It was sort of a rearranged life. This was me falling down, just done with like the initial rabbit hole of Bitcoin. I'm deciding to re-architect my life. In that, just put all the pieces together. And I decided that I was going to propose to my fiance, now wife, in that experience, which she doesn't even know that. I should probably tell her that. And so, yeah, anyways, I just want to tie that back to John Lilly. And it was one of the more special experiences I had. The next morning, ride the motorbike home, seeing the world with new eyes, felt like I had died and come back, and just blissful, and saying goodbye to Bali, which we had spent, half the year there. So it was kind of a special moment.
That's awesome, man. What's fascinating is, so for you, that was was it a retraction of the sensory input that allowed your mind to explore? Because a lot of times with mushrooms or LSD, it almost seems to be a heightened sensory input, I guess, when you're out in nature and being involved with the world. But then in this sensory deprivation tank, yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, one comment on that actually, where if you're in an environment, let's say you're at a concert or something, which is a common place people will use psychedelics. In that environment, your sensory experience is going to overpower any type of internal work that you might want to do. That's my experience. It doesn't mean it can't be enjoyable. Like LSD and music go together very well, and I've done that many times, and I actually support recreational use, which could be another topic. We can describe that versus sacramental. However, in the float tank, you turn off all those sensory inputs. So it felt like my mind was floating in this black astral plane. And I was like a surgeon who could just, I don't know how to describe this, but like zoom around into different corners of my psyche and view them as a third-party observer. I didn't have the emotional attachment or fear or any sort of emotion attached to these thoughts. And so I could just look at them with clear eyes, no bullshit ego in the way, and just like, okay, this is the right thing to do here. Okay, cross that off the list, re-architect that. Okay, do that. And it honestly was not visual. And I would say it was a surprisingly mild in terms of like classical symptoms. However, it just was what I needed at the time. I was in a conflicted time. It was a transition, and it gave me what I needed.
And just an additional point on that, and I may be mistaken here, but I believe, because it's been a while since I've consulted the studies that were done, because maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, and I think it was at Hopkins or possibly Imperial College London. But I think, John, to your point, what they actually found was that your brain is not actually hyperactive when you're intoxicated on psychedelics. It's rather the opposite. That's, just like a flotation tank, different, the areas like the default mode network and other areas of your brain that are typically very active, they quiet way down. So it's almost like when you quiet it down, you're tuning it differently to allow other things to emerge in the void that's left over by the quiet space, sort of thing. And so that's interesting, that you're not introducing something that's just running your brain on overdrive, and that's why all this is happening, but somehow you're actually quieting it down, and this experience is allowed to occur, which is interesting.
Just to shift gears here, I'm just curious about. I feel like the experiences that I have, particularly on LSD, are a little bit differently. And so like I actually like to do a lot of sports when I'm pretty high on acid. And I'm curious if you guys have ever had that experience. I specifically, I really like skiing and I really like cycling when I'm on acid. And I'm not going to say like these do have some dangers to them. But specifically, I cycle on.
Should we have a warning session?
On back roads that aren't being trafficked by people. In addition to I'll do backcountry skiing by myself, and I found that it just really allows for a much deeper experience in terms of I feel fused to my body, and it really helped me accelerate my process of becoming an advanced skier and really kind of pushing my edge with cycling. So I'm just curious if you guys had similar experiences at all, or if I'm just a weirdo. I mean, I know I'm a weirdo, but
well, I know I've heard this story and I rewatched it today. Actually, there's a video on YouTube of a professional baseball player who apparently he got off the airport and took acid. It was back in the 70s, and kind of blanked out and forgot that he had a baseball game that day, and he ended up going and pitching a no-hitter through that entire game, which the story is hilarious if you go and watch it on YouTube.
Great story. He threw a lot of errant pitches. However, no one could hit him. And describing him, I can't remember the exact words, but it has, oh man, I'm not even going to try. But the way he described normally pitching and what it was like during that experience, like trying to throw the ball into a catcher's mitt the size of a house and weird things like that.
Right.
But I do have some experience combining psychedelics with sports. I think it's actually fantastic. But I would say for me, I need to make it a lower dose, right? Like I would say 50 micrograms of LSD-ish. Which I'd also consider like a museum dose or a concert dose or something like that. But there does seem to be something there, especially for adventure sports. Like for me, it's ecstatic dance, climbing, and surfing. Those are probably the three things I've noticed tremendous benefits. But it's almost like detaching the conscious mind from the body in a sense. It's almost like your body knows what to do and it gets your mind out of the way. And that's especially powerful with dancing, where you're going to get in your own way, or surfing, where you don't have time to think. You see the wave, you react, you put yourself in the position, and you have to feel the situation. You have to be 100,000% present. Otherwise, you're horrible. And I feel the same with climbing. You can't just lazily climb, you die. And so it focuses the mind. And I think those tools are really helpful in that sense. Also, even just weight training, low doses, great. Going for a run, great.
Yeah, I've heard lots about using them in more active settings, like lower doses, of course, or for most people. But for me, it's always been meditative. Like I actually really like what Terence McKenna called channel normal. Like if I've structured it properly. So if I have gotten the amount of sleep I want, and if I'm exercised, and if I've done a cold plunge, and if I've done all the things that over the years I've found help set me up for, having a clear mind, I love it. I don't like to perturb that very often. But when I do perturb it, I like to perturb the fuck out of it. And, I like to see where that goes. So the only thing that I do actively is usually in my, ceremonial trips, I'll expose myself to elements a lot of the time, which is why I really like the winter trips, in this neck of the woods, because it could be -20 and, 80 km/h winds. And I have, I get into this sort of meditative trance state where, again, this is where the hocus pocus language comes in, but I access some sort of cocoon of energy that keeps, like, I'll have, I won't have gloves on my hands or anything like that. And I'll be in that meditative state. I'll be fine. I'll be completely given up to the experience completely. And as a result, the experience seems to be like, I got you, I'm going to take care of you while you're away. And I noticed a similar sort of thing when I was in the Amazon. There it's an incredibly oppressive environment. And, I remember one night I was lying down and, it's hot and sweaty and gross, but you can deal with that. And you're vomiting and you're shitting and you can deal with that. But there was like 50 flies on my face, buzzing around, sucking, just, and normally that would be, very annoying and pull you out of damn near any experience you're in. But like the degree to which I guess I give up or give into the experience, it seems to the experience seems to take care of me while I'm away, sort of thing. And so the fly bites were a non-issue, the cold is a non-issue, and I'm actually interested in pursuing how far that can be pushed. It makes me think of, we've all seen like the Chinese monk underneath like the freezing river for hours, or these kind of feats of these miraculous feats that monks and stuff like that have done throughout the ages. And I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I wonder if it's some sort of a similar phenomenon. And I do know that when I'm in those kind of the apex of the experience, my breathing and my heart rate, my respiration rate becomes involuntary, but extremely atypical, like extremely different, and not just like hyperventilating or something like that, but it's almost like I can feel my body functions adjusting in order to maintain the energy that seems to be flowing through me at the time, and just pushing me further into the experience. And so it could mean I hold my breath for really extended periods of times, or or hyperventilation, it's never something to be concerned about. Like I don't have an ounce of like, oh, this is bad. I have such a faith in the experience that I know this process is happening so that I can engage in the experience more deeply. And I'd love to hook myself up to some gear and get some data off of these experiences. And I'm probably pretty close to doing that at this point, but just to see if there's any interesting phenomena that comes out of that. So we shall see.
One point to piggyback on is modern. He's not a monk. He's quite playful, but Wim Hof uses breath work, changes his state, and then also does a lot of broken all kinds of records with cold therapy. And I did the Wim Hof method for like 3 months, and I think that was probably the most productive, focused, best I've ever felt. Wake up, do that, and then go to work. And there'd be times, 2 or 3 times in 3 months, where I would, I don't want to say like a spontaneous psychedelic experience, but that's about as close as I can get. Like I was bit by a bug, just a random run-of-the-mill bug. And that just sort of catalyzed it, jolted me. But I was still feeling like vibration and very open perception from the Wim Hof. And then I went into like a 2-hour mini mushroom trip, completely sober. But just tuned from Wim Hof. And yeah, I can hold my breath for like 4 or 5 minutes after doing that. Normally maybe like a minute. I don't know. Mind over matter. I think that's part of it.
That's absolutely part of it. Why'd you stop doing that if you felt so awesome as a result of?
Yeah, that was also in Bali, and it was just disrupted routine, come home, move, new place, and just haven't got back into it.
Right.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention Wim Hof and kind of bring up the possibility of, I was going to ask if you guys had experienced similar types of psychedelic experiences or altered consciousness type of experiences without the assisted use of substances like LSD or mushrooms. Because just as a quick aside, like I started doing the Wim Hof breathing as well, probably earlier this year, around the time around like March, when the whole COVID thing started happening. I had actually had a LSD trip that had where things kind of got a little out of hand, and I think that in some ways it was a little too much too soon for me, and just kind of maybe a little reckless in in the amounts and the set and setting and stuff, but it sort of, it brought me into a very hyper anxious state that then sort of started having relapses, I guess is one way to describe it, where I would come back to this similar state where I was like afraid that I was dying, and my heart would start beating, and I would go into like a panic attack, basically. And I would listen to Wim Hof breathing, or the Wim Hof breathing method, and it would really help to bring me out of that state. And it gave me like this sense of empowerment over my body, of like hyperoxygenating my body, my blood. And I've been doing it pretty much daily, like twice a day. And I've noticed like sinus infections going away, and, all this crazy stuff. So I highly, anyone listening, definitely check out the Wim Hof method. He has some really great tutorials on YouTube that are free.
Yeah, and on that note, I'm not at all against, using safe natural substances to elicit these experiences. I'm not in the camp of like it somehow degrades them whatsoever. I mean, first of all, what could be more natural than a mushroom? It seems like we've co-evolved with those organisms for an extremely long time, so it only really makes sense that that's kind of our doorway into some ancient and mysterious part of ourselves. But to those people that do either have those reservations, or from a practical consideration about laws and legality and whatever else, access, holotropic breath work is something that was developed by Stan Grof, who basically developed this way of eliciting a psychedelic type experience. I've never done it, disclaimer, but I've read a lot about it, and I know it's a fairly well-established practice where they use basically hyperventilating breathing with loud music and some other activities to try to elicit this experience. And apparently there's a pretty reliable efficacy with it. So if that's if you'd rather go that route, there are methods available. And ancient cultures, this is the other really interesting thing about this subject matter. I mean, this is nothing new. This is part of the reason what led me to it. It's like and I think all Bitcoin, like, we're interested about culture and history and how all of this came to be as it is. And that's one of the amazing things about Bitcoin, and one of the kind of analogs with psychedelics is it gives you a different perspective. Once you realize the linchpin that is money and how it affects so many things, your perspective changes on everything. Because if you realize how much money influences everything, well, if the money is corrupt, you have to look at everything with suspicion now and say, well, how has this been corrupted by the money? And similarly with psychedelics, you gain access to a different perspective, and that causes you to see things differently. But historically speaking, both kind of high civilizations, developed civilizations, the ones that we all know about, like Egypt and Greece and Sumeria and China and all this stuff, they all had methods of eliciting these types of extra conscious or mystical experiences, as did a lot of the less developed cultures in the Amazon or Siberia or Africa. It's like a human thing to say there's areas of my mind that I know are there, but I can't normally access. Let's develop methods or protocols to reliably access them. And the question is, well, why? Is it just an intoxicant? And I would say no, because the sociology, I guess, or the anthropology of intoxication is pretty well documented, and we kind of understand why we do it. But these pursuits are of a different kind and of a different nature, and I think we've pursued them so consistently throughout human culture because there are benefits to be derived from engaging in them. And when I first went down the rabbit hole of like what the fuck is going on with the world and what's wrong with the world, one of the things I wanted to know is like, well, once you have all the wealth and power of fill in the blank civilization, like what are the secrets and the mysteries of all these civilizations, whether we're talking about Egypt or Greece or Rome or whatever. And again, you see consistently a mystery school, people that guarded the access and the knowledge of and to these experiences. And for why they held them so closely and why they were somewhat exclusive, I don't know. But it was all there, and they were incredibly important and instrumental and revered. Brian Muraresco, I'm reading that book right now, actually, as well, Brandon. And he's that book that Brandon just held up is looking at, is kind of focusing the narrative around Eleusis, the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, and asking what were they using to facilitate, what was going on there? What was this mystery all about? What were they using to facilitate what seems to be altered states of consciousness? And why were people so enthusiastic or hyperbolic about the importance of these ceremonies that they were holding there? But then it also tracks the lineage of like, well, where did it come from? It didn't start at Eleusis. Again, these were represented all over the world in all different cultures. So, what is the lineage of these experiences, and why do humans keep coming back to that well and saying and recognizing the importance of them? And I don't know the answer to that question. I know I derived a great deal of meaning from these experiences, but it's one of those impossible questions to answer. Is what is it? Is it the spirit realm? Is it God? Is it some different form of energy? Is it just another area of your own consciousness? Is it the astral plane? Like, there's no answers like that to be had. All you can really know is how it makes you feel, and whether or not you think it's beneficial to continue to try to feel that way from time to time, and how you change as a result. What you're imprinted with and what you're compelled to change or motivated to become as a result of these tremendous experiences. So yeah.
One thing, just to piggyback quick off of Brian and the immortality key, the big standout for me from his research was that, okay, we know the Eleusinian mysteries. There's a lot written about that. Very fascinated rite of passage. All the famous Greeks that you can name right now were all initiated through this psychedelic experience. That's interesting in itself. But what I found interesting with him is he expanded, and he found that mystery, either before or after like the nucleus in Greece, was all the way out in Spain. And he essentially found all these churches, and in those churches there was wine, right? You serve wine with church, whatever. But what he found was that in the vessel that they would make this wine, it wasn't just fermented grapes. Every one had its own concoction of other substances involved. And so it pretty much says that all those pre-religious or pseudo-religious, maybe pagan, whatever, they were using drugs in the wine. And they had ergot, which would contain a psychedelic substance similar to LSD, also different forms of cannabis, and a wide range of other herbs that have mind-altering effects. And so what that says is this is extremely fundamental to the human experience. And it's also fundamental to animals. Hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, or maybe all animals seek changing consciousness. And then you have to say why. And I agree, it's not just to get high, that wouldn't stick. It could be a source of novelty, right? You have a new bunch of ideas, and the psychedelically inclined would maybe outcompete their competitors. Or maybe it's simply that humans have this conscious mind and it's amazing, but it also doesn't want to rest. It's sort of, we have this curse of consciousness that we have this agitated mind. And so in some sense, we do things to get out of our mind, to quiet our mind, because that's like a very peaceful state. And you can do that through achieving flow state through sports or through drugs or through all different methods. But it's quite an interesting question to ask.
And I also wanted to revisit something that John brought up earlier about, you know, both the access and legality part, and even the classification of like calling these drugs. Like I almost feel like that's a pejorative in and of itself. I personally have a hard time classifying psychedelics alongside with something like benzodiazepam, just because they're such radically different experiences. And I only wanted to touch on this point because in my youth, like that was one of the ideas I had, was that, like, you know, all drugs were all drugs, that they were these experiences that were made to like take away from you. And revisiting that now, particularly with my experience around alcohol, is I feel very strongly that alcohol is an extremely damaging substance, particularly for people that can't get control around it. Like I can't, you know, like I am an alcoholic, like I can't drink, I can't control myself around it. And when I had these experiences with psychedelics and with cannabis, and realized that I could have these other experiences that could feed me and help heal me, that I didn't get this compulsion for, I felt deeply betrayed by both the state and society. And that, you know, they would be like, oh, like LSD is like a bad criminal drug, but here, like, get yourself fucking shithoused, like give yourself alcohol poisoning, like that's totally appropriate. And I just want to visit that point because, like, frankly, I also think like this is one of the ways that we're deeply controlled too, is by being educated that alcohol is okay, but, you know, other substances aren't. And I just want people to really take it upon themselves to say, both considering legality and access, there's also the ethical component of, you know, what sort of right do you have to these things? What sort of right do you have to change your conscience using these? And I think that's a question people need to ask for themselves. And I just feel it's really important, particularly with people that are really struggling in difficult places, you know, whether it be with something like alcoholism, or depression, you know. And that was one of the other things that, you know, unsurprisingly with my alcoholism, I also had a lot of depression. And I found, while my initial experience with psychedelics really helped me put aside the bottle, it was the continued work through psychedelics and getting to look at my own psyche, and getting to look at those cobwebby places that I had never visited before, really made the difference of not just overcoming alcoholism, but really being able to deal with my depression in a meaningful way, so that it's no longer this dominant force that controls me. It's something that I feel in control of.
Great points.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, people always talk about how drugs are bad, they're illegal, and society, we're so against drugs as a society, right? Well, no, like you mentioned, alcohol is very supportive. In fact, people brag about drinking. Everyone's a hopeless caffeine addict. Nicotine's okay. Pharma, no problem. Just go to your doctor and you'll get overprescribed whatever you need. And yet they have the nerve to classify these healing tools in the same category. I find that to be extremely offensive. And the point you brought up there, Eric, which I like to frame as cognitive liberty, it's not my term, but I like that term, which is essentially saying that I have the ability to do with whatever I want with my own mind. And if I'm in my own house, I'm not hurting anyone, that should not be anyone else's business. And that pairs nicely with Bitcoin, which is our monetary liberty. I don't think the state should determine what we use as free people to exchange value with. And so that's a nice bridge between these two communities. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous that you can be thrown in a cage for, you know, having a completely internal experience that doesn't even harm you, let alone anybody else. That your life can be destroyed for pursuing that is, it's the height of absurdity, and it's reflective of the insanity of many aspects of the culture and system and, you know, reality of the world we live in today. And there are definitely hopeful signs that that's beginning to change, but there really is not enough indignation about how egregious of an infringement on an individual's freedom and their own rights that actually is. Like, it's just, it's kind of, oh, well, people don't really contend with it. Like, oh, well, you got to protect the children. I mean, that's the most people can muster in defense of something like that. And otherwise, it's not. And this is why I kind of always come back to, current democracy in the modern world is kind of a big Stockholm syndrome sort of situation, where you just end up considering the permissions you've been granted as you end up thinking that you've constructed the perimeters and parameters of your freedom, when all you've done is adopt the permissions that you've been granted, and convince yourself that it's the freedom that you desire. And I love how that's changing. Obviously, Bitcoin is going a long way to breaking down the structures that enable that infringement to take place. And it's also causing people to question those structures and to question things differently. And a conversation like this is an example of that. But yeah, I mean, especially when I'm actually having these experiences and I reflect on that, I just think like, oh my, like, it's beyond insanity that they're restricted in the way they are. However, it may be the case that that's how it's always been, because in many cases, not everywhere, of course, but in a lot of the more developed, let's say, cultures throughout history, as Brandon was saying with Eleusis, like, they were exclusive rights and mysteries, and you had to kind of be in the elite to access them. And why that was, I don't know. And we had things like the witch trials and witch hunts and all the other atrocities that have happened throughout history. And I'm sure there was some other ancillary reasons as well, but a big part of it was that they were, whether it was against the church or the state, they were creating their own connection with, quote unquote, the divine, and giving people direct access to the divine. And that was not acceptable from the point of view of the state or religious institutions, and they were murdered for it. And so it's a real liberation. Hopefully this momentum of both Bitcoin, the convergence of these tools of liberation that we seem to be engaging with as a society today, and the changing narratives, hopefully they continue and they build momentum, and we're able to turn that around and finally allow people to live lives on their own terms and explore their inner worlds however they see fit, without threat of punishment, and as a result, the disincentive to do that. Because as we've been discussing so far, I think we all agree that however you engage in these experiences or states of consciousness, there is great benefit to be derived from that. And if you're disincentivized through punishment or pain of death or whatever the hell else to not do it, then you are cut off from becoming the person that you might become, and from having the life of meaning and happiness and joy and peace that you might otherwise have. And that's a tragedy. And so hopefully that's beginning to turn around.
I 100% agree. And I have to, like, as you were talking, John, I was thinking about how it's almost as if when earlier today, or earlier in this conversation, I mentioned that I had a powerful spiritual experience in high school. And what that was like basically just going into a worship setting in a house and having people pray for me, and then having a tangible, like, electric pulsating feeling fill my entire body, and a mind opening experience, right? And so having that, it having someone tell me that, like, that experience is not not allowed, or you're not supposed to, somehow illegal or something like that, that's that was a life altering moment that affected everything after my after my life, or after afterwards it happened. And with I mean, it's really not much different to using something to alter the way you perceive reality or the way you look at your life. So yeah, I was just thinking about how like that it's an intrusion into our most intimate being. Yet we just it is just an accepted part of our society. So taking that view of things, it just really like, yeah, it just kind of blew my mind of like, wow, we are not free in so many ways in which even we think we are.
100%.
Speaking about Christianity and psychedelics, there's a famous study, I'm sure most people know, the Marsh Chapel experiment or the Good Friday experiment in the 60s, where a bunch of seminary students, I think they ate a bunch of mushrooms. And the idea was just to go into their normal worship setting under the influence. And then they would say, okay, well, if they already have this framework of spirituality, what happens when you give them mushrooms, right? Are they going to meet the same like space elves that Terence McKenna talks about, or are they going to meet Jesus Christ incarnate, right? And there's some great insights from that, but one of the standouts for me was most people viewed it through their lens of a Christian God. And also looking, the most powerful thing about that was, I think it was like 60% of the people said it was among the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their life, right next to having a child, getting married, death of a loved one, etc. And so just wanted to tie that in.
Yeah, I did want to kind of pull that thread a little more. I know, John, you mentioned that this is, you take it almost as a sacramental, ceremonial process where it is something that you see is allowing you to connect further into the divine and to somehow, yeah, that it's opening you to that aspect of your existence. It is, I yeah, I don't, I guess what I'm wondering is like, is it important, or do you feel that connection like going on into your normal everyday existence, or is it something that you kind of get a glimpse of, and it just helps orient things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of degree, like
Okay.
some like was it, I don't know if it was Huxley or Blake who said, like, well, once the doors of perception are cleansed, everything appears as it really is, infinite, right? And then the other one is the man who walks through the door, is never the same, or is always changed. And so there's a transformative element to this thing. But as I continue to pursue it, because I continue to believe that there's benefit to doing so, and I think it impacts my perspective on life and how I orient myself and how I live effectively tremendously. Now I can't. I believe, like, I don't think, I think what you access in that domain is not accessible in normal waking consciousness, right? So however you get there, like whether it's through holotropic breath work or mushrooms or whatever, like it's a definitely a different state of consciousness, and so different, in my opinion, that even if I can't recall, I can't put something in my memory while it's happening and then draw on it later, because this form of consciousness is not capable of reconstructing what that was. And so therefore the memory component is not operable. Like, yes, I might have a hint of like a theme that was going on or a sense of what was feeling, but like I can't recreate it because this form of consciousness can't reconstruct it whatsoever. So the memory it's not really useful there. But those things the differences in perspective that you end up having regarding nature and death and spirituality and your fellow human beings and your fellow living beings and everything is forever changed. And I think that does force you to think and act differently when you move forward in your life. And like I stumble all the fucking time, like, because once I come back to ego John, I mean, I'm not the Godhead anymore, right? I'm just a fucking regular dude, and I make mistakes and I beat myself up and I do things I wish I hadn't done, and I don't have as much control over how I deploy my energy and my thought and my action as much as I would like sometimes. In that state, everything is pristinely as it should be. And, perhaps that's another part of the reason why I like to revisit that place, because everything is in balance and I'm completely integrated and in accord with both myself and everything else, And I know, again, that's to bring back the cliches, but I think there's a lot you can bring back. And I, more than anything, because memory is not very operable, I rely on being imprinted. Like I give myself up so much to the experience, and the experience is what it is. And then I just have a faith that I will be, imprinted or transformed to some degree by that experience. And as a result of coming out of it and going on with my life after the fact, it will permeate through me in some way. And, I try to pay attention to a certain degree, and I try to leave myself open to being somewhat inspired or imprinted or motivated by what goes on in those experiences. And it's, I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years and I don't ever see myself stopping. So it's gotta be, meaningful and beneficial in some way. So I guess the proof is in the pudding. I mean, this is the point that I always made with my friend who I've done most of these with. Is like, because you come out of this, and just like there's a lot of analogs with Bitcoin, because you come out and you're like, you want to tell the world, you want to get up on the mountaintop with the loudspeaker and be like, you fucking idiots have no idea that this exists. Like, you guys, you're living a normal life and you don't know that this is available. Everyone stop what you're doing right now, put it on the front page of every paper and go and do this or start this process. But you can't, right? Because people aren't receptive to that way of communicating or persuasion. The only thing you can do is you have to show them that there is actual benefit in any action that you take, right? And so whether it's working out of the gym, eating right, engaging in Bitcoin, taking psychedelics, the proof is you, unfortunately, sometimes, because it makes it a lot harder to make your case, because you actually, if it doesn't change you, then how can you even presume to make the case for it? Because someone will just look at you and be like, yeah, but I mean, you're saying how fantastic this thing is, but I'm not that impressed, So with psychedelics, I always felt that the best way to promote them was to try to improve myself in accord with my values and what I find meaningful, and then be very open about discussing this pursuit and my experiences with it, so that people know that, to whatever degree they see something they like when they engage with me, they know that was a component of how I've constructed myself. And I felt that I did the experience justice by doing that. Like I have such a reverence for the experience that I don't want to be a poor representative for it. And I felt that, that was the best way I could convince other people to look into these pursuits. And after that, you let the chips fall where they may, and that's it.
I mean, I'll echo your sentiments, and I think you said this at the beginning too. Like I'm trepidatious about, really discussing these things, because language is such a piss poor and crud tool to really hold or explain these experiences. In addition to like my approach of sharing it is almost similar to Bitcoin at this point in time. Like I'm like really uninterested in selling people on it, and like it just doesn't jibe with me, you know. Like if people come to me asking and they're really curious and they I can tell that they're yearning for that. Yeah, like I'm happy to help them, but you know, trying to give it to people who aren't ready or interested, it just doesn't really work. In addition to you know, I think the personal psychological preparation to go in and have these experiences, I think are pretty important, particularly for the first experiences. You know, I always think it's too bad when I hear about somebody who has one of these experiences where, you know, they're like at a festival and their friends like, yeah, here you go, like take a tab, like it'll be a great time. And turns out it's not, because, you know, they weren't held or understanding about what that experience was. Um, so yeah, you know, I just wanted to echo that sentiment of I think the best way is to live as who you are, and to, you know, allow for those experiences to shine through you as an individual and a person. In addition to the fact that, you know, like maybe being this forthright with it all isn't serving. Maybe it needs to stay a mystery that people have to kind of dig for and try to seek out for themselves. You know, I'm not really sure, but, you know, one of the reasons why I agreed to do this is I think there's a lot of people out there that really are struggling in all kinds of ways with mental health disabilities, with depression, with anxiety, with whatever. And this is a real tool that they can use to help. I'm not saying it's a cure-all, but like as utilizing as a thoughtful tool that you can have in your arsenal of things, it's really important, particularly for people at the end of their rope too, you know. And I think dealing around with the, you know, this COVID has really affected people mentally in a pretty extreme way. And so I think it's really important that people know that there are these extra tools out there. Because I even found in my experience when COVID first started going on and we didn't really know what was going on and it looked pretty scary, I found that having a psychedelic experience in a thoughtful container really helped ground me again and let go of a lot of the anxiety I was feeling. So
I think that ties nicely into where we are as a society too, where it seems like a pretty obvious statement to say that mental health is a huge problem, like you mentioned, Eric. And what are the tools available, right? You go to the doctor, they're woefully unprepared and they throw SSRIs or benzos or other nonsense at you. And almost everyone claims that they're at best partially helpful. And most people will say that I feel foggy and dull. And yeah, okay, maybe I don't go as low as I once was, but I also just stay right in that gray dial tone state. And that's not a way to live. And so it's really optimistic for me to see all these states legalizing these tools. There's a massive psychedelic renaissance going around right now where we're going to have these awesome retreat centers all over the United States where you can go in nature with proper guides and deliver these experiences to the uninitiated in a safe place, unlike the, hey man, just take a tab and go on your way festival experience, which is an awful time. And tying to that, I know lots of people who have said, yeah, one time in college, I got really drunk at a party and ate some mushrooms. That's not for me. I'm like, okay, I understand why you think that. However, that's not for anyone. Maybe try that again as a mature adult. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic that psychedelics they're actually needed right now. They really, really are. Our society's sick. And it's not just mental health in like the clinical sense. It's also purpose. Young people feel lost. And that's also why Bitcoin is so attractive to young people who maybe have a gap in their life around purpose. And so maybe you could say this is the fall of religion, and humans need something larger than themselves to essentially orient around, and that makes you become a better person. And so yeah, it's not just mental health, it's purpose, it's basic wellness. And it's almost like they're arising when they're needed. We're going back through anthropology and we're discovering all these other tools, and we're trying to learn from these ancient cultures like we feel like something's missing. And Bitcoin's the same way. Like it feels like it's appearing when we need it most. it's ramping up, and now it's 2020. Okay, honeymoon stage is over. It's getting real now. And I see both of these tools as among the most important things for society today.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Those are phenomenal points. And, you know, to share some of my own experience, which I didn't bring up earlier on, but that was exactly my scenario. You know, like I was looking out at the world as a young 20-year-old and thinking like, this place is fucked, you know, and I was a big reader. So I read about the medical industry and the lobby industry and the military industrial complex and the oil industry and political, like I tried to piece it all together. And my conclusion was, fuck. You know, like I don't see how this is going to turn out well for everyone. And so I was seeking like something to save me from that despondent, hopeless feeling. And I was like, there must be something in the world that of greater meaning, right? There's got to be something to save us or to save me. And you know, the traditional religions didn't do it for me, and that was a big part of my study. And like Brandon said, like I initially did away with them entirely, and I've come way back to appreciating certain elements of them, but by no means adhering to any one of them specifically. But you know, I think that's part of the reason why I was searching so hard and so curious about what other mysteries lied beyond, because I felt like I needed them to exist, you know? And so when I ended up finding psychedelics, and you got to be careful anytime you do that, when you want something so, you know, badly, or you need it so badly, you got to be careful how you approach it, because you don't want to delude yourself into thinking that something is something it's not just because you need it to be that way, you know? And we should feel the same about Bitcoin. And I think we all do approach it cautiously like that. But with psychedelics, when I finally discovered them, like it was a source of hope and meaning where I didn't have one, or didn't have a lot of it prior. And I think it helped guide me through, you know, those times. And to Brandon's point, the fact that, you know, Bitcoin, you know, I became aware of Bitcoin shortly thereafter. And that was really the piece that, you know, because I think I've shared this before, but I was like, what are you going to do? Shove a bunch of mushrooms down like every world leader's throat and hope the world changes for the better? Like it's a nice
Sounds like a
thought.
good espionage project.
Yeah,
to
it's a
me.
nice, or do, you know, LSD in the water supply, what they were scared about that in the 60s or whatever. Like it's a great thought, but do we not just fall back into the same habits? Because you got to ask the question, why did we wind up in this, you know, here in the first place? And so I think it would be great if more people if they were legalized and more people had the opportunity to access them. But I don't think that's the fix. It's a really important element of ourselves that should be integrated into how we construct our view of ourselves and how we construct our view of the world. But the fact that a real genuine mechanism for generating structural change about how humans coordinate and interact in the form of a new and upgraded form of money, which is Bitcoin, that's the piece that means that we can potentially avoid falling back into, you know, the trap of whatever shitstorm we've constructed for ourselves, and maybe build something better, and maybe build something way, way better. And, you know, when I hear Brandon saying like, you've got this, you know, the psychedelic renaissance, which is definitely happening and hopefully it continues. Like imagine when we have all these like mini Eleusises all over the world where you can go and have these experiences the right way, and, you know, the global economy, or at least, you know, the nation state, you know, within a certain geography, you know, the money is a fair money like Bitcoin with all the attributes that we often talk about. Like when you start piecing together those converging, you know, changes and the momentum that they're generating, it really gets you excited for what kind of a world lies not too far off in the horizon. Like, you know, where people are engaging with things, you know, more honestly and genuinely and in a more healthy, integrated manner, and where, you know, the people and structures that would seek to corrupt or, you know, pursue their own ends unfairly or maliciously, they're far more restrained than they ever they will be far more restrained than they ever were in the past. And you can see something really, really amazing bubbling up. And I mean, we're just at the very beginning of it. And I'm so grateful to be here right now. Sometimes I catch myself wishing like I could see it 50 years from now just to capture a glimpse. But, this is actually my point that I always bring up is like, for better or for worse, we're actually the ones that are like going to have to contribute to this and actually make it real. Like us having these conversations and us engaging and contributing to something like Bitcoin, and us sharing, connecting with like-minded people and contributing in whatever our way of contributing is, like that's how it happens. So as much as it's great to observe and get excited, be like, holy crap, this is so exciting. It's, it's also our duty in a way to shape it in the image that we think is best and collaborate with others to refine that over time. And I mean, the fact that those two trends alone are converging, and I think probably several others that we could identify as well, is cause for a great deal of hope where previously there was very little.
Amen, brother.
I love that, John, and I couldn't help but think as you were talking that I feel like part of what's really going on is we're rediscovering a true ethics of self-care, of what it means to live as communities together that truly care for ourselves in this way that, I believe that utilizing and putting your wealth in Bitcoin is a form of self-care, because it shows the utmost respect to myself and my savings outside and beyond, not just the nation state, but violence or other things. And psychedelics is the same thing. It's a self-care for ourselves that allows for us to explore our mind deeper and allows for self-exploration. And both of these things require some very true thoughtfulness and an application of deep consideration. And I feel like that's part of the general trend, is that we're moving towards this world where we're starting to consider that once again, because of the way that we've been so thoroughly abandoned by both the consumerist and fiat society, and the way that it's left us just as empty husks. And so, as cool as it would be to see 50 years out, I'm just so goddamn excited to be here and to be part of this, and I love just sitting back in the realization, being like, whoa, like I'm really part of this. This is all actually happening. These conversations are truly changing, and it's just such a privilege, particularly compared to like where I saw stuff at in like late 2009, where for me it was just so dark. And it's just really exciting. So I'm really happy to get to share in this conversation, and just to really get to reflect on that and know that like what's really going on is really important, and it is changing the world, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, there's a thread to continue on that, which is, if Bitcoin does what it's going to do, and that changes the world and for the better, we're on a sound money standard, it disrupts the state, all those things. When will we start to see that in a societal shift? Like, are we living through the benefits of hyper Bitcoinization in our lifetime? Or is that, is that 5 years out? Is that 50 years out? Is that 500 years out? That's yet to be said. And I believe we're in the hard stage. We're in the transition period where the clay is still wet, and what we do now really matters. And I wouldn't say that that's like the nice and blissful thing. Like, we're deep into it. There's going to be the biggest challenges are yet to come. And I don't think there's going to actually be a dawn from this on any like, okay, society is truly better now, maybe for generations. And I don't think that's probably the most common thought in Bitcoin land, but I think we have to go through a lot still. I can see a vision where we have more sovereignty, a Bitcoin standard, psychedelics are integrated in society in some sort of way. But I think that there's a lot of pain before that.
As a further question there, Brandon, I'm wondering what you think about the sovereign individual thesis and how he describes the transitions through these phases of human civilization, from the agricultural revolution to the feudal revolution to the industrial, kind of getting quicker and quicker, to where the agricultural took thousands of years, the feudal revolution took hundreds of years, and the industrial revolution took place within one generation. And the thesis is that the information revolution or change is happening much quicker, to the point where whatever happens, with positive or negative, will occur much faster. And I certainly sense that things are just happening so quickly. But to your point, I don't think that guarantees a dawn that will come immediately or very soon.
Yeah. So the question is essentially, could I be wrong in the sense that this is an exponential change and I'm viewing the future linearly, but really the next 10 years could everything could happen in 10 or 20 years, right? That's sort of the question. I submit I could be very wrong. It could happen much quicker, right? And I think 2020 does mark a change, right? Like I would say the last 10 years, almost nothing happened. And now things are really starting to happen. The financial system needs to be replaced. We have too much inequality. That needs to resolve itself. Bitcoin's rising. We're essentially onboarding a carbon-based life form onto this networked brain internet thing. And humans are starting to grapple with what that means. And I would argue that the internet is just starting. What we consider the internet today will probably look very, very different in 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 years. And so, yeah, like I'm open to the fact that this is exponential and it could happen a lot quicker, for sure.
I think, I think it's important to remember that there is no end state. Everything is always in flux, right? So there's no like things will be great then. As much as I just got really excited about what's to come, and I am, like, there's no end point, hopefully, so we will always look toward the future as hopefully being better than the present. And but I do think, for what it's worth, like my thinking on it lately was like, it really could happen, or the change that we often talk about could happen very quickly, but of course it's not going to be evenly distributed, so we may end up living, the four of us and many others, we may end up living in a place that has a high degree of freedom and a high degree of wealth and a high degree of technological sophistication and et cetera, et cetera. But, a large portion of the world may not, and maybe there's a reasonable analog in like the Italian city-states, when they emerged, like Venice and Genoa and Florence and these places, like they were probably far more orderly, far more advanced, far more wealthy, far more sophisticated than other areas of even the European world at the time. And, we don't need to get into all the specific reasons why, but I think, ultimately the world we get is just a reflection of like each of us as individuals taken together. And so there's going to be a lot of individuals that are going to be earlier on the timeline than, let's say, people like you and I, and there's people that are ahead of the timeline than us, and that's just the nature of the beast. So that the people that still have a long ways to go in terms of maybe changing their mentality and changing how they construct their lives, and grappling with who they are and all the different things that go into becoming the person that you are. Some people have not done a lot of work in that domain. And so whether they do so voluntarily or they're forced to, that's going to be difficult. And all manner of unexpected consequences can emerge when that's happening on the scale of humanity, or at least, cultures and nation states and that kind of stuff. So I am not naive to think like there's not going to be, there's certainly a potential for hardship, but I also see, like, with each passing day, we don't go from problem to solution. Both are unfolding at the same time. And, hopefully we all just continue to make choices that lead toward solutions for ourselves and collaborate or coordinate to construct solutions for one another. And I'm hoping we surprise ourselves in how attractive or alluring and successful that is at helping other people who may to be inspired to join, that approach to life, or join that approach to change, or whatever. So of course it could go either way, but I continue to be impressed and motivated by just the small little changes I notice in myself and others on a daily basis, and think like, what if more people start, seeing things that way and acting in that way? And just as a very kind of simple or overly simplistic example is like 2020 Bitcoiners, class of 2020 that have come in this year. I'm amazed at how much they've changed. I've had some of them on the podcast, and people are coming from vastly different mindsets and philosophies and approaches to life, came into Bitcoin, interacted with the people and the intellectual capital through podcasts and books and articles and all that kind of stuff, and have found themselves transformed in a matter of months, to the point now where, like, they're taking care of themselves better. They have a different, maybe political ideology or philosophy. They have a different approach to their time and their future and their planning and their money and who they want to spend time with and the things that they value and the things from which they derive meaning in a couple months. Like, it's insane that's occurring. And I'm hopeful that as number go up and as this sucks in more people and more press and more intellectual capital, that not only will the price be exponential, but the case that we're effectively making through the culture that we're creating becomes more and more strong, and it attracts more and more people. So, we definitely live in a bizarro world, so anything can happen, but I gotta place my bets on the hopeful outcome, and that is that we continue marching in the right direction.
100%. I wholeheartedly agree, man. And what I am sensing right now is just from hearing you guys talk, is a real urgency to consider the fact that what we are doing actually matters, and it matters a lot. And sometimes I discount that a lot as just like a random pleb on the internet, trying to like explore what Bitcoin is and learn and, talk to you guys about it. And for one, I feel like eternally grateful for you spending the time, on this discussion and going into such a deep personal topic. So thank you guys. But also we're here, at the end of 2020 and on the precipice of a whole new year, 2021. And I can't help but like feel some butterflies thinking like we're going into 2021 and like 21 million, like all this, the symbolism is rampant, I suppose. And I know, there's a few people listening now, and I know many people in the Bitcoin community look up to you guys and, take take your words seriously as like an inspiration for their own life and for whatever they're going through, and as leadership. So I guess what I'm wondering is there how would you like to what kind of advice or how would you like to call what would you like to say to someone who's looking at 2021 and they want to make the best impact possible and want to take their part and take action in this revolutionary thing and grow as a person and also contribute, and maybe I think that would be a good way to close this out as we're getting on 2 hours here.
I think I'll take a crack at it first. I would say, looking into this whole field of Bitcoin, I'd say, explore the topic, get to know it intimately and try to carve out your own niche, and maybe it doesn't catch on at first. Like I've been doing this kind of philosophical Bitcoin thing for like 8 years. And I thought for the longest time, nobody had any fucking interest in this. And it's been really great because, through the encouragement of my friend and a couple other people, like I have one really great friend who I read a lot of philosophy with, and he was like, no, keep going. It's like super important. Like you need to do this. And there's so many other places where it's relationally important and tangential. And I think that through whatever an individual's specialization or talent or whatever it is, like chase that and fuse it with this and contribute and ask questions. And I think it's really important to get to participate in that way, whether you're an artist or an organizational person or really anything. Just try to contribute and participate and ask thoughtful questions and be present. And I think through that alone, a lot of productivity will happen, in addition to the final component of keep challenging yourself to go one level deeper. If there's something you don't understand, or if there's questions that you have, like ask them and dig at it. And I assure you that if you don't find the answer, you can definitely help co-create that answer.
Great answer, Eric. I would piggyback on that in a sense. I'll go next. It's quite similar to my thoughts, which is like how to make an impact in Bitcoin land, or even in your own personal life. And I think the thread of being uniquely you is the most important one. You can learn from other people. You can try on what they're doing and see if it works for you, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it has to be you. And so some people would say, find your personal monopoly. That's sort of like a Navalism, or just like be true to yourself and follow that path, because anything other than that is only going to be a dead end. And so skip that, just be confident in who you are and follow those passions. And in Bitcoin, it's celebrated. People celebrate thinking for yourself and bringing your own perspective. And so do that, right? Like I made a small dent in this world by talking about mycology in Bitcoin, which is absurd. That the idea that could possibly be interesting to other people still blows my mind. When I wrote this, I was too scared to publish it because people were talking about all these topics that I only had a basic understanding of, like finance and economics, history of money, all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but have you heard Bitcoin's a mushroom? And now that's becoming a thing. And I might even I might turn that into a book. I have so much more content to publish on that. And yeah. And on that same note, like secretly, my mission is also to get Bitcoiners into mycology. It's an incredible rabbit hole. It does solve a lot of problems in our future. And I think increasingly so. For example, we're going to go colonize space. How do we do that? Well, mycology actually has an answer to a lot of those problems. Those organisms are extremophiles. They weigh nothing. You can bring mushroom spores into space that weigh nothing. And you can actually train mycelium to do whatever you want. So NASA right now has a study where they're trying to grow moon bases out of mycelium. And so, yeah, I mean, I can go on all day about that kind of stuff. So consider mycology. DM me if you want an on-ramp. I'll give you some resources. And then to wrap up with the psychedelic stuff, I don't know why this quote came to mind, but I love it from Terence McKenna, where he's like, take it easy, man, but take it.
Take it.
I'll leave it at that.
So good.
Also, just mushroom hunting, super fucking rad. It's like doing a treasure hunt in the forest. So if you haven't had a chance, you should absolutely do it.
If you're in Minneapolis between May and October, I'll take you foraging and blow your mind.
All right. I might take
That's
you up
quite
on
the
that,
offer. Honestly, Brandon and Eric stole mine, but like it just I know this is super cliche, but I just feel like so many of us, myself included, less and less so. I'm attempting for it to be less and less so, but we build our own cages. Like we inhibit ourselves more than anything or anyone. As much as I decry the the state of the world and the limitations and the infringements on freedoms that the structures of society impose on us. Like the reality is most of my, the things that inhibit me are me, out of fear and out of, a lack of belief or whatever it is. But so the only, pretty much the only thing that I ever say is like, continue to refine your understanding of both yourself and whatever it is that you find meaningful or interesting, and express it in whatever way comes most naturally. Like, don't be afraid to step out and, say how you really feel and express your curiosity about something, and connect with other people who do, and try different things. Like there's really nothing to be embarrassed about. Like we're all fucking idiots wandering through the dark, not knowing what the hell is going on. Like some people get social validation, more social validation than others for a period of time. And then they don't like, so what I try to tell myself is like, what do you care about? Who are you? Fuse those two things, go forward. And, life is kind of an attempt to figure out how to do that most effectively. So that's pretty much, that's my approach. And I don't know if it's a good one, but I guess that we shall see over the course of time.
I'd say that's a good one. And if it's not a good one, like what else is there? Like that's the best way to go as far as I'm concerned. Guys, thank you so much. This was awesome. Really looking forward to another year of just exploring this world with you guys and seeing what comes. I think Bitcoin blasted through 29,000. I think when we first.
Isn't it amazing
started.
that as Bitcoiners, we just had a 2-hour conversation. The price wasn't brought up. The all-time high wasn't brought.
Yeah, I know.
Like we don't even care anymore at this point. It's pretty fascinating. I mean, like it's great, right? But like it's not even really a topic on the agenda, which I really enjoy. So
definitely.
I mean, I've got a steak thawing in the other room. I'm going to go cook after this to celebrate a new all-time high. I had to buy a new quarter cow and a new chest freezer just so I can have a steak every all-time high. We'll see how long that lasts.
Nice.
Very nice.
Oh, man. All right, guys.
Well,
Thanks
John,
so much.
I appreciate you putting this together and the way that you've stepped out in recent months and started exploring, your curiosity and expressing yourself. I think it's awesome. I think it's an example for other people, and it's an honor to be a part of it occasionally. So thanks very much. And Brandon and Eric, it's always a pleasure to get to jam with you guys. Hopefully,
likewise, John. Likewise, John, and yes to Jon Chenot, good job on stepping out and trying out these things. It's fun. I'm happy to have shared these experiences, and I'm pretty blown away by how similar your guys' experiences and my own were. Totally independent of one another. So
yeah, that as just a quick note, like that is fascinating to me. Just how similar. It almost feels like I'm talking to a brother or a long lost friend. A lot of times, whenever I meet a Bitcoiner, especially in person, it's really crazy. So maybe we did all know each other in a prior lifetime or something.
Who knows, man?
Yeah. Did we find Bitcoin or did Bitcoin find us?
Yeah.
To be continued.
To be continued. We'll see.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, guys.
All right, guys.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Peace out.